During the Soviet era, people were told that the party lived modestly and that all its work was for the good of the people. But behind the scenes, something completely different was happening. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union had its own hidden economy. It was not the country's budget, taxes, or industrial revenues. It was black party money, billions of dollars that were not officially accounted for anywhere. This money came from various sources. For example, from the sale of Soviet weapons abroad, from foreign economic operations through special firms, from the collection of membership fees from millions of party members, and also through intermediary structures working with the West. All these funds were accumulated in the so-called party treasury. But this was not a cash register in the literal sense of the word, but a network of accounts, assets, and property registered to frontmen and organizations. According to various analysts' estimates, by the end of the 1980s, the party had up to $15 billion at its disposal. These were not just pieces of paper. The money was kept in foreign currency, gold, and assets abroad. These funds were controlled by a small circle of trusted individuals in the CPSU Central Committee, and most citizens were unaware of their existence. It is particularly interesting that the CPSU had its own banks abroad. For example, Sofs Agran Bank in Vienna, as well as accounts in Switzerland and Germany. Through these banks, the party cashed millions and carried out transactions that were not officially recorded in the USSR's accounting records. And all this worked around the Ministry of Finance and the State Planning Committee. The most surprising thing is that this whole system was built over decades and carefully guarded. Even among high-ranking officials, only a few knew about it. And when the USSR began to collapse, these assets were among the first to go underground. When people in the USSR said dacha, they imagined a wooden house with vegetable gardens and a bucket of water from a well. But for party leaders, the word dacha meant something completely different. These were huge plots of land with mansions, private hunting grounds, lakes, helipads, and security. They were located in picturesque places, on the shores of the Black Sea, in the Moscow region, in the Caucasus, and in the Baltic states. Only a select few had access to them, members of the Central Committee, the Politburo, and the top leadership of the Special Services. These dachas were not just places of rest, they were true symbols of power and status. They had chefs, medical staff, baths, saunas, and even movie theaters. All of this was at the expense of the state, more precisely at the expense of money that bypassed ordinary citizens. According to official data, there were more than 500 such dacas in the USSR, and almost all of them were registered not to specific individuals, but to fictitious state structures. Supposedly, they were recreation centers for officials or creative retreats for writers. In reality, they were closed areas to which ordinary people were strictly forbidden to enter. The most striking developments began after the collapse of the USSR. Many of these properties suddenly found themselves in private hands. Some of the former party dacas were quickly transferred to relatives or acquaintances of officials, and all this for literally pennies. To this day, no one has conducted a full investigation into who became the owners of these properties and how. Many of them still belong to shadow owners and are used as elite villas, sanatoriums, and residences. But if party dachas were the visible part of the privileges, the real treasures were kept in a completely different place, far beyond the borders of the USSR. While the country stood in line for food, the party elite transferred huge sums of money abroad. Everything happened quietly, without publicity. The money that had been accumulated for decades in the CPSU's black cash register began to be transferred to Europe and the United States, even before the official collapse of the Union. This was done through complex schemes: front companies, fake contracts, bank transfers to accounts registered to unsuspecting technical persons. In 1990, when the situation in the country became completely unstable, the disappearance of about $4 billion from accounts controlled by party structures was recorded. This money literally vanished into thin air. Formerly, it was listed in Soviet foreign economic organizations, but in fact, it ended up in foreign accounts, often in Swiss, Austrian, and German banks. What was particularly surprising was that some accounts were registered to people who could not be found at all. These were so-called technical persons, drivers, security guards, librarians. They did not even know that they had become owners of millions. The banks that accepted this money did not ask any unnecessary questions. The main thing was the capital. Accounts were opened under the guise of trading or consulting companies, and the money was described as payment for services or Soviet intellectual property. Today, most of this money has disappeared without a trace. Some of it went into luxury real estate, some into private investment funds. No one has ever conducted a full investigation into where these billions went. But transfers do not happen on their own. Behind every account, every scheme, and every dollar were specific people. They knew exactly where the money was going, whose names the accounts were registered under, and what to do if everything suddenly started to fall apart. These were not politicians or party leaders, but those who stood in the shadows: accountants, financiers, economic managers. There were few of them, but they held the keys to the CPSU's black cash register. Several officials who dealt with party finances were found dead, allegedly suicides, accidents, or heart attacks. Others simply disappeared without a trace. All of them were connected to the financial structures of the CPSU, kept records, participated in money transfers, and knew the scheme for withdrawing money. And all of them, for some reason, either disappeared or did not live to see serious interrogations. When the USSR collapsed, it seemed that everything would start from scratch. But in reality, everyone's starting positions were different. Some lost their jobs, others lost their entire country, and still others gained access to the billions left over from the CPSU. This money, which no one talked about openly, suddenly became the basis of new wealth, and thus a class of future oligarchs emerged. Part of the party's funds did not simply disappear, but was smoothly transferred into private hands. The money was not kept in one place. There were party warehouses, foreign currency accounts, property, real estate, brand name stores, buildings, dacas, and recreation centers. All these assets were gradually transferred to newly created private companies. The owners were former party officials or their associates. The strangest thing is that the documents that could confirm this transfer were either destroyed or classified. Many former party officials quickly retrained as businessmen. They created banks, trading houses, and investment funds. They had connections, resources, and, most importantly, management experience. They knew how the system worked and simply seized the moment. Instead of gray suits, they wore expensive coats and mink fur coats. Instead of speeches about equality, they had personal drivers, restaurants, and business plans. The money that had previously served the party quickly turned into private capital. But in order to spend it openly, the main thing had to be done: legalize it. Simply put, everything that previously belonged to the party now belonged to the new masters of life. Dacas were re-registered to relatives, buildings, and factories to newly created private firms. Financial flows were formalized as investments, and connections in ministries helped to legalize everything. Party leaders and top officials became owners of banks, trading houses, hotels, and even oil companies. According to official data, by 1993, about 40% of the country's largest enterprises were under the control of former members of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. These were the same people who, until recently, had been reading reports on socialism, and now they were talking about profits, shares, and business. They did not participate in privatization like ordinary citizens. They already had money, connections, and lawyers. What is particularly important is that no one was punished. These people quickly fit into the new system. The billions of dollars that had been accumulated over decades in the party's black cash register did not disappear. Some of it went into business, some into private palaces, but most of it is still hidden in offshore accounts and private funds abroad. This money is not held in open accounts. It is registered to trusts, fictitious companies, and charitable organizations through which assets can be controlled without identifying oneself as the owner.